I thought my husband was asleep upstairs, but his laptop was still open downstairs and my name was on the screen. Not in a message, not in a note, in a place it never should have been. And the moment I understood why, I stopped shaking. So let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before all of this happened to really get why what I did next was so perfectly calculated. My name is Sarah, I'm 30-5 years old, and I'm a UX/UI designer, which basically means I design apps and websites for companies that want their products to look good and work smoothly. I've been doing this for about 8 years now, and I'm not trying to sound cocky, but I'm really good at what I do. Which means I don't have a boss. I find my own clients, I set my own hours, and I make my own money, or at least I thought I did. My husband Mark is 30-8, and when I met him 7 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, he seemed like everything I'd been looking for. He was confident. He was charming. He worked in sales for a big tech company. And he had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when he talked to you. I remember thinking, wow, this guy actually listens. This guy actually cares about what I have to say. Looking back now, I realize that was the first red flag I ignored. Because narcissists are amazing listeners when they're studying you. When they're figuring out exactly what buttons to push and what weaknesses to exploit. We got married after 2 years of dating, and for the first couple years of marriage everything seemed fine. We bought a house together in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. And we split the mortgage 50-50 because we both believed in being equal partners. Mark made good money at his sales job. I was building my freelance client base. And we had this joint account where we both deposit money for shared expenses. The agreement was simple. We each kept our own personal accounts for our individual spending, and the joint account was for mortgage, groceries, utilities, all that boring adult stuff. But somewhere around year 3 of our marriage, things started shifting in ways I didn't recognize at the time. Mark started making little comments about my work. Nothing too harsh at first, just these tiny digs that felt like concern, but looking back were actually designed to make me doubt myself. He'd say things like, "Are you sure that client is going to pay you on time? Freelancers always get screwed," or "maybe you should think about getting a real job with benefits. This freelance thing's so unstable." And I'd laugh it off and tell him I was doing fine. My clients loved me, I was making decent money, everything was good. Except it wasn't good. Because while I was defending my career choices to him, he was already planning something I couldn't even imagine. See, Mark had access to my email. Not because he hacked it or anything dramatic like that, but because early in our relationship I'd given him my password when I needed him to check something for me while I was driving. And I just never changed it afterward, because why would I? He was my husband. I trusted him, and I had nothing to hide. That password was the key to everything that came next. About 6 months before the night I walked into his office, I started noticing something weird with my bank account. My freelance income seemed lower than I expected. Not dramatically lower, just like 10 or 15% less than what I thought I should be making based on the projects I'd completed. But I'm not great with numbers. I'm a designer, not an accountant. So I just figured maybe I was miscalculating my rates or forgetting about taxes or something. I didn't think my own husband was literally stealing from me. Around the same time, Mark started being more distant. He was staying late at work more often, he was on his phone constantly, and when I'd ask him what was going on, he'd get defensive and say I was being paranoid and clingy. Classic gaslighting move. And it worked because I started questioning myself instead of questioning him. Maybe I was being too needy. Maybe I should give him more space. Maybe I was the problem. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, middle of December, freezing cold outside, and I couldn't sleep. I'd been working on a big project for a startup client and my brain was still buzzing with design ideas and I just couldn't shut it off. Mark had gone to bed around 10, said he was exhausted from work, and I'd stayed up finishing some mockbus. Around 2:30 in the morning, I finally closed my laptop and decided to go downstairs to make some chamomile tea to help me relax. That's when I heard it. This soft pinging sound coming from Mark's home office, which was just off the living room. He'd converted one of our spare rooms into his workspace about a year ago. Said he needed somewhere quiet to take work calls and handle paperwork. I usually didn't go in there because it was his space and I respected that. But the pinging kept going and going, and I thought maybe he'd left his laptop open and it was some kind of alert that needed attention. I pushed the door open slowly, and the room was dark except for the glow of his laptop screen sitting open on his desk. The pinging was coming from his messaging app, notification after notification lighting up the screen. And I know I shouldn't have looked. I know privacy is important even in marriage, but something in my gut told me to step closer and see what was making all that noise at 2:40-7 in the morning. The messages were from someone named Jessica M., and they were not work messages. I miss you, baby. When are you coming over? Did you tell her yet? I can't wait to start our real life together once you're finally free. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My legs went weak and I had to grab the edge of his desk to steady myself. My husband was cheating on me. Mark, the man I'd loved and trusted and built a life with, was having an affair with someone named Jessica M. and apparently planning to leave me. But then I saw something else on the screen that made the cheating seem almost small in comparison. Right next to his messaging app was a spreadsheet. Excel, multiple tabs, really detailed. And the tab that was currently open had my name at the very top in bold letters. Sarah's income, it said. And below that were rows and rows of entries, dates going back 3 years, company names I recognized as my clients, payment amounts that matched my invoices, and then a column that said redirected with dollar amounts that I'd never seen in my account. My hands started shaking so bad I almost knocked over the coffee mug sitting on his desk. I clicked through the tabs with my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. There were 3 years' worth of records showing that Mark had been intercepting my client payments. Not all of them, that would have been too obvious, but about 30-40% of my freelance income was being diverted to an account I didn't have access to. He'd been doing this by accessing my email, responding to clients as me, and giving them updated banking information for payments. The clients had no idea they were paying the wrong account because the invoices looked legitimate and the work was getting done. I did the math in my head quickly. Over 3 years, at 30-40% of my income, he'd stolen somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000 from me. Money I'd worked 12-hour days for, money I'd earned designing websites and apps and branding packages, money that should have been mine. And then I clicked on one more tab and found something that made me actually gasp out loud. It was a folder of screenshots. Messages between Mark and Jessica. And in these messages, Mark was talking about me, calling me boring, saying I was dead weight, telling Jessica that I couldn't even support myself financially and that he was basically carrying me. She thinks she's some successful designer, but she barely makes any money. One message said, I'm the one paying for everything. Once I leave her, she'll realize how pathetic she really is. I had to cover my mouth to keep from screaming. This man had been stealing my money for 3 years, using it to fund his affair, and then telling his mistress that I was a financial failure who depended on him. He'd gaslit me into thinking my income was lower than it should be while he was literally taking it from me and using it against me. I stood there in his dark office, staring at that glowing screen, and something inside me shifted. The hurt was there. The betrayal was crushing. But underneath all of that was something cold and sharp and calculating. I'm a designer, which means I solve problems for a living. I look at broken systems and figure out how to fix them or rebuild them better. And right then, standing in the dark at 2:40-7 in the morning, I realized that Mark had just given me all the tools I needed to destroy him. But I couldn't do anything stupid. I couldn't scream or cry or confront him right then. If I did that, he'd know I knew, and he'd cover his tracks and I'd lose my advantage. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed to document everything, plan everything, and when I finally made my move, it needed to be so devastating that he'd never see it coming. So I took out my phone and started taking pictures. I photographed every single tab of that spreadsheet, every screenshot of his messages with Jessica, every piece of evidence that showed what he'd been doing. My hands were shaking so bad that some of the photos came out blurry and I had to retake them. The whole time I was terrified he'd wake up and come downstairs and catch me. But I couldn't stop. I needed this evidence. When I finally finished, I had over 100 photos on my phone. I closed his laptop exactly how I'd found it, backed out of the office, and went upstairs to our bedroom where Mark was sleeping peacefully like he didn't have a care in the world. I stood in the doorway watching him sleep and I felt nothing. No love, no anger, just this cold, empty space where my feelings for him used to be. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling, and started planning. I'm good at planning. It's literally part of my job, breaking down big projects into smaller tasks and executing them in the right order. And this was going to be the biggest project of my life. The next morning, Mark woke up cheerful and normal, kissed me on the forehead, asked me what I wanted for breakfast like everything was fine. And I smiled at him and said pancakes would be nice. And I watched him walk downstairs whistling to himself, completely oblivious that I'd just uncovered his entire double life. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. I needed help, professional help, because this wasn't something I could handle alone. So that afternoon, after Mark left for work, I started making calls. I found a divorce attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases, a woman named Patricia Chen who had amazing reviews and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in court. I booked a consultation for the next day. I also found a forensic accountant, someone who could trace money trails and build airtight financial cases. His name was David and he'd worked on fraud cases for both private clients and law firms. I explained my situation over the phone, told him I had evidence of my spouse redirecting my income, and he said he could help me build a case that would hold up in court. And then I did something that felt dramatic but necessary. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Marcus who specialized in infidelity cases. I needed more than just text messages. I needed photos, timestamps, locations, everything that would prove Mark's affair beyond any doubt. All of this cost money, but I had savings in my personal account that Mark didn't know about. Money I'd stashed away over the years just in case. I never thought I'd actually need an in-case fund. But here we were. Over the next week I met with all three of these people separately and started building my case. Patricia, the attorney, told me that what Mark had done wasn't just grounds for divorce. It was actual theft and fraud, and I could potentially press criminal charges if I wanted to. David, the forensic accountant, started going through my bank records and the photos I'd taken of Mark's spreadsheet, tracing exactly where my money had gone. And Marcus, the PI, started following Mark, documenting his meetings with Jessica, taking photos of them together. And through all of this, I acted completely normal at home. I made Mark dinner every night. I asked him about his day. I laughed at his jokes. I even initiated sex a few times because I knew if I suddenly became cold, he'd get suspicious. It was the hardest acting job of my life, pretending everything was fine when all I wanted to do was scream at him and throw his laptop through a window. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because I was building something bigger than just a divorce. I was building a complete destruction of the life he thought he had. 2 weeks after I'd found that spreadsheet, David, the forensic accountant, called me with his initial findings. He'd traced $70,000 of my income that had been redirected to Mark's personal account over the past 3 years. He had documentation of every transaction, every invoice, every client payment that had gone missing. He said this was one of the clearest cases of spousal financial fraud he'd ever seen. Patricia, the attorney, told me this evidence was solid gold. Not only would I get a favorable divorce settlement, but I could potentially sue Mark for theft and get that money back with interest. She also said that because Mark had been hiding income in his personal account, he'd likely been committing tax fraud too, and that could get very messy for him very quickly. And Marcus, the PI, had been busy too. He'd followed Mark to Jessica's apartment for times into weeks. He had photos of them kissing in her doorway, holding hands while walking through a park, having dinner at restaurants on the other side of town where they thought no one would recognize them. He even had photos of Mark's car parked outside her building overnight on 3 separate occasions when he'd told me he was working late or traveling for business. I had everything I needed to destroy him legally, but I wanted more than that. I wanted to destroy him socially, professionally, financially, every possible way a person could be destroyed. Because what he'd done to me wasn't just cheating and stealing. It was years of psychological manipulation, years of making me doubt myself, while he was the one lying and stealing and gaslighting me into thinking I was the problem. So I started phase 2 of my plan. I created a fake business. Well, not completely fake. It was a real LLC that I registered in my name. But the purpose was strategic. I called it something generic like Summit Solutions Consulting, and I built it a professional-looking website using my design skills. The company was supposedly a business consulting firm that helped sales professionals transition into entrepreneurship, and I made sure Mark knew about it. And I was thinking about taking it on. Mark's eyes lit up like I'd just told him he'd won the lottery. Suddenly, he was very interested in my work, asking all kinds of questions about the project, who the client was, what the scope looked like. And that's when I planted the seed. I told him the client was actually looking for a business partner too, someone with sales experience who could help build and run the consulting side of the business while I handled the technical design and development. I said I'd mentioned Mark's name and the client was very interested in meeting him. Would he be interested in something like that? Mark couldn't say yes fast enough. Suddenly my boring deadweight wife who couldn't make money was offering him a ticket into a 6-figure business opportunity. I watched the calculations happening behind his eyes, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. This could be his way out. He could quit his job, start this business, make even more money, and then leave me for Jessica without financial consequences. He had no idea that Summit Solutions Consulting was a trap designed specifically to destroy him. And that's when things started to get really interesting, because Mark didn't just agree to meet my client. He started making plans to quit his job at the tech company where he'd worked for 8 years. So let me tell you what happened next. Because this is where I stopped being the victim and became something much more dangerous. Mark started meeting with my fake client. Except there was no client. It was David, the forensic accountant, playing a successful business consultant named Richard Chen. I'd briefed David on exactly what to say, what opportunity to dangle in front of Mark. And David was perfect. Expensive suits, talk about previous ventures. Made Summit Solutions Consulting sound like the next big thing. During their second meeting, Mark told David he was unhappy in his sales job and ready for something bigger. He said his wife, meaning me, was supportive but didn't really understand business at his level. When David played me that recording later, I had to pause it and walk away because I was shaking. This man had stolen $70,000-$3,000 from me and was telling a stranger he'd been carrying our household financially. But I stayed focused. By meeting 3, David offered Mark a position as chief sales officer. Starting salary $120,000 per year, equity, bonuses. Way better than his current $80,000-$5,000 job. Mark came home glowing. Said this could be our ticket to financial freedom. And I played the supportive wife perfectly. told him how proud I was, how he deserved this. But then Mark surprised me. He didn't jump immediately. He came home the next night and said he was having second thoughts. He said leaving a stable job after 8 years felt risky. Maybe he should negotiate with his current company first, see if they'd match the offer. I could see him calculating, being cautious, and for a moment I worried my plan might fall apart. So I did something I didn't expect I'd have to do. I pushed him toward the cliff. I told him he'd been talking about wanting more from his career for years and this was his chance. I said he was too talented to stay in a job that didn't appreciate him. I made him believe that taking this risk was the brave thing to do, the smart thing. And it worked. 2 days later, he went into his company and gave his 2 weeks' notice. His boss tried to keep him, offered him a raise and promotion, but Mark turned it down. He thought he had something better waiting. During those 2 weeks, Marcus the PI got me more evidence of the affair. Photos of Mark and Jessica at a weekend getaway at some bed and breakfast. Mark had told me it was a sales conference. Instead, he was in a romantic cottage with her, and Marcus documented everything. But then I found something that made the cheating seem almost small. I was checking my email when I noticed a strange thread with TechFlow, one of my biggest clients. Someone using my email address was telling them I was raising my rates from $4,000 to $6,000 per month. Except I hadn't raised my rates. I had no idea this conversation was happening. I scrolled through and realized what Mark had done. He'd been accessing my email, posing as me, negotiating rate increases with my clients. TechFlow had agreed, but that extra $2,000 per month wasn't coming to my account. Mark was pocketing it. I checked my other clients. He'd done this with 3 others over the past 6 months. He was stealing an additional $5,000 to $6,000 per month from me on top of everything else. This wasn't old theft. This was active, ongoing, escalating. I called Patricia immediately. She said this made our case even stronger because it showed Mark had no intention of stopping. Mark's last day at his tech job was a Friday. He came home with champagne talking about how free he felt. We toasted and I smiled while counting down the days until everything collapsed. His first day at Summit Solutions Consulting was the following Monday. David had set up a co-working space downtown with business cards, email addresses. Everything looked legitimate. Mark showed up in a new suit and David welcomed him with a tour. For the first week, Mark was completely absorbed. He'd come home talking about strategy sessions and client pitches. He was convinced this was real. Then David made his move. He told Mark they needed to make investments to get the business off the ground. Marketing, infrastructure, hiring. He said he was putting in $50,000 and asked if Mark would contribute to show commitment. Mark came home stressed. He said he was thinking about taking out a personal loan, but didn't have $50,000 in liquid cash. And I made my move. I told him I had $30,000 saved that I'd invest in his dream. I played it like I was being the supportive wife sacrificing for him. Mark's face lit up. He hugged me, told me how much this meant to him, except that $30,000 wasn't my emergency fund. It was bait that Patricia and I had set aside specifically for this. We needed Mark to take a financial action that would tie him deeper into this fake business, something that would hurt when it fell apart. So Mark took out a personal loan for $20,000, combined it with my $30,000, and invested $50,000 into Summit Solutions Consulting. He signed contracts, transferred the money, was officially all in. 3 weeks later, David called an emergency meeting. Said a major client backed out. Company facing a cash flow crisis. Needed $20,000-$5,000 immediately or they'd shut down. Mark panicked, came home pale and defeated. Said he didn't know what to do, had already maxed out his loan capacity. That's when I suggested the home equity line of credit. I framed it as our future, our security. Mark hesitated. He said, "Sarah, are you sure? That's putting our house on the line." And I looked him in the eyes and said, I believe in you. I believe in us. He applied for a HELOC for $40,000. Needed my signature because we both owned the house. I signed every document with a smile. The HELOC got approved and Mark transferred 20-5,000 to save the company. Kept 15,000 as backup. At this point, Mark had invested 70-5,000 total into a fake business. More than he'd stolen from me. The symmetry was beautiful. While this was happening, Marcus continued documenting the affair. And what he found was interesting. Jessica wasn't just some random woman. She worked at a competing tech company. Mark had been planning to leave me for over a year. This was calculated. Long minus term. About 5 weeks into Mark's fake job, I noticed he was getting more stressed. David was creating realistic business problems, giving him small wins but enough setbacks to keep him anxious. Mark was working long hours, coming home exhausted. One night he broke down, said he was scared, had left a stable job for this opportunity and wasn't sure it would work out. He looked at me with desperate eyes and asked if I thought he'd made a mistake. I told him no. I believed in him. Everything would work out fine. I comforted him while thinking about all the nights I'd worked 12-hour days, only to have him steal my money and call me worthless. Then something happened that forced me to accelerate my timeline. I was at a coffee shop when I overheard two women talking about their friend Jessica, who was dating a married man named Mark. One said Jessica was thinking about giving him an ultimatum. The other said she should just dump him. This was a problem. If Jessica forced Mark's hand, he might panic and confess everything before I was ready. I needed to maintain control. I called an emergency meeting with Patricia, David, and Marcus. We decided to set a date. 2 weeks from then, Friday evening, we'd detonate everything simultaneously. Patricia would serve divorce papers. David would inform Mark the company was shutting down. I'd be at home with locks changed. It was going to be the most devastating day of Mark's life. But then, 3 days before execution, I came home and found Mark at the kitchen table with his laptop open, head in his hands. He looked up and his face was completely pale. He said 4 words that made my heart stop. "Sarah, we need to talk." And I realized whatever he was about to say, he was already too late. My mind was racing through 1,000 possibilities in the 2 seconds it took me to respond. Did he find out about Patricia? Did David slip up? Did Marcus get caught following him? I kept my face completely neutral and sat down across from him at the table like my world wasn't potentially about to explode. "Okay," I said calmly. Mark took a deep breath and closed his laptop. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. And then he said something I absolutely did not expect. "Jessica's pregnant." I felt like I'd been hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. Of all the things I'd prepared for, of all the scenarios I'd mapped out in my head, this wasn't one of them. Mark was having a baby with his mistress. A baby. While still married to me. While still living in my house. While still pretending to care about our future together. I must have looked shocked because Mark immediately started talking faster, like he was trying to explain himself. He said Jessica had told him 2 days ago. He said he didn't know what to do. He said he'd made a terrible mistake and he needed to come clean with me about everything. And here's where it got really interesting. Mark started confessing. Not everything, but enough to make himself look like the victim of circumstance rather than the calculating thief and liar he actually was. He told me he'd been having an affair for 18 months. He said he'd met Jessica at a conference and they connected and he'd made a huge mistake. He said he'd been planning to end it but now she was pregnant and he felt responsible. He didn't mention the money. He didn't mention stealing from me. He didn't mention telling Jessica I was a worthless wife who couldn't support herself. He was confessing to the affair like it was his only sin. Like if he could just get me to forgive the cheating then everything else would stay buried. I sat there looking at him and I had to make a split-second decision. Do I blow up right now and tell him I know everything? Or do I keep playing my role and let my plan proceed exactly as scheduled? I chose option 2. I let tears come to my eyes. I let my voice shake. I asked him how long, why what I'd done wrong. I played the devastated wife perfectly while inside I was recalculating my entire strategy, because now there was a pregnancy involved and that changed things. Mark actually had the audacity to reach across the table and try to hold my hand. He said it wasn't my fault, that I'd been a good wife, that he'd just been confused and made bad choices. He said he wanted to work things out if I was willing to try. He said Jessica meant nothing to him and he'd end it immediately if I gave him another chance. I pulled my hand away and told him I needed time to think. I needed space. I got up from the table and went upstairs to our bedroom and locked the door. And the second I was alone, I called Patricia. She answered on the first ring and I whispered the situation to her. Pregnant mistress. Partial confession. Mark trying to salvage the marriage without admitting to the theft. Patricia was quiet for a moment and then she said something that made perfect sense. He's trying to control the narrative. If he confesses to the affair and you forgive him, he thinks you'll never look deeper. He thinks the pregnancy will distract you from the money. She was right. This was Mark's move. He'd realized Jessica was about to force his hand with the pregnancy, so he decided to confess on his own terms, frame it as a mistake rather than a calculated betrayal, and hope I was too emotional about the affair to notice the $70,000 he'd stolen. But he'd miscalculated badly, because I already knew everything. And now, I had even more ammunition. Patricia said we needed to move up our timeline. Not to weeks from now, but now. She said she'd have the divorce papers ready by tomorrow and we'd serve him Saturday morning. David would shut down the fake company Friday. Marcus would deliver the evidence package to Jessica Friday evening. Everything was happening faster than planned, but I was ready. I spent that night in our guest bedroom. Mark knocked on the door around 11 asking if we could talk more, but I told him I wasn't ready. He said he understood and he'd give me space. I called a locksmith and scheduled him to come Saturday morning to change all the locks. I called a moving company and arranged for them to pack up half the furniture Friday evening while Mark was at work. I called my best friend Dana, who lived 2 hours away, and asked if I could stay with her for a few weeks. She said yes without asking questions. I was systematically dismantling Mark's world and he had no idea. Friday morning, Mark tried to talk to me again before leaving for work. He said he'd ended things with Jessica, told her the pregnancy was a mistake and he was staying with his wife. He said he was going to be fully committed to our marriage if I'd give him a chance. And I nodded and said okay, we'd talk this weekend. I was still processing. He kissed me on the forehead and left for work, actually believing he'd successfully managed the situation. At 10, David called Mark and told him Summit Solutions Consulting was shutting down effective immediately. Investor pulled out, cash flow problems unsolvable, company dissolved. David said he was sorry, but there was nothing he could do. And then he hung up. Shark called me 30 seconds later in complete panic. He was practically hyperventilating. He said the company collapsed. His investment was gone. $70,000 just vanished. He said he didn't know what to do. How would we recover from this? He'd destroyed our financial security. I told him calmly to come home and we'd figure it out together. While I was waiting for Mark to drive home, Marcus was across town delivering a package to Jessica's apartment. Inside that package was a printed file containing bank statements showing Mark had been stealing my income for 3 years. Screenshots of messages where Mark called me worthless and said he was financially supporting me, and photos of Mark's spreadsheet detailing exactly how much he'd stolen and where it had gone. There was also a note that said, "You're having a baby with a thief and a liar. Everything he told you about his wife was a lie. Here's the proof." Marcus left the package at her door and texted me a photo as confirmation. At 2:15 p.m. Mark came home looking absolutely destroyed. His eyes were red, his tie was loose. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one morning. He sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd confessed about Jessica 2 days ago, and he put his head in his hands. "We lost everything," he said. "The investment, my job. I don't know how we're going to pay the mortgage. I don't know what to do." And I sat down across from him and I said something that made him look up with the first flicker of fear I'd seen in his eyes. "We didn't lose everything, Mark." He stared at me confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that $30,000 I invested wasn't my money. I mean Summit Solutions Consulting wasn't a real company. I mean Richard Chen was an actor I hired. I mean I've known about everything for 2 months and I've been systematically destroying your life while you thought you were getting away with it all." The color drained from Mark's face. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. I pulled out my phone and showed him photos of his spreadsheet, the one that documented 3 years of theft. I showed him bank statements David had traced. I showed him screenshots of his messages with Jessica calling me worthless. I showed him everything. "You stole $70–3,000 from me," I said. "You gaslit me into thinking I was failing at my career while you were literally taking my income. You cheated on me, got your mistress pregnant, and then tried to confess just enough to keep me from looking deeper." But I already looked, Mark. I looked at everything. Mark's hands were shaking. He tried to speak, tried to say something that sounded like I can explain. But I cut him off. "You invested $70–5,000 into a company that never existed. You quit your job for a position that wasn't real. You took out a home equity line of credit based on a lie. And now you have nothing. No job. No income, no investment, no wife. And a mistress who just received a package showing her exactly who you really are." Mark stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "What did you send to Jessica?" "The truth. Bank statements, messages, proof that everything you told her about me was a lie. That I'm not a lazy wife who depends on you. That you've been stealing from me and using my money to fund your affair with her." Mark's phone started ringing. He looked down and I saw Jessica's name on the screen. He didn't answer it. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, then immediately started ringing again. "You should probably answer that," I said. "She's going to want an explanation." Mark looked at me with something between rage and desperation. "You planned all of this? The job offer, the investment, everything, every single piece. You thought you were so smart, stealing from me for 3 years, having your affair, building your exit strategy. But you got sloppy, Mark. You left your laptop open. And that one mistake gave me everything I needed to destroy you." His phone was still ringing. Jessica calling over and over. "Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. "You're being served with divorce papers," I continued. "Patricia Chen is my attorney and she's building a case for fraud and theft. David Martinez is a forensic accountant who traced every dollar you stole. Marcus Webb is the private investigator who documented your affair. And all of them have been working for me for 2 months while you thought you were winning." Mark finally answered his phone. Jessica was screaming so loud I could hear her from across the table. She was calling him a liar, a thief, a manipulator. She was telling him she never wanted to see him again. She was saying she'd talked to a lawyer about the pregnancy, but he'd better not expect anything from her. Mark tried to calm her down, tried to explain, but she hung up on him mid-sentence. He looked at me with pure hatred. "You destroyed everything." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed everything. I just made sure you faced the consequences." That's when Mark did something I didn't expect. He grabbed his laptop off the table and ran upstairs to his office. I heard the door slam and lock. I heard him typing frantically. Drawers opening and closing, things being moved around. I texted Patricia he's in his office destroying evidence. What should I do? She responded immediately, let him. Everything he deletes is already backed up in our files. Destroying evidence makes him look worse in court. So I waited downstairs while Mark tore his office apart trying to erase the proof of what he'd done. But he was too late. Everything was already documented, filed, backed up in 3 separate locations. Around 6 p.m. the moving company arrived. I told them to pack up the living room furniture, the guest bedroom, anything that was clearly mine. Mark heard the commotion and came running downstairs. What the hell are you doing? Moving out. This house is in both our names, but I'm not staying here another night. I'm taking what's mine and I'll let the lawyers sort out the rest. You can't just take our furniture. Watch me. The movers were professional and fast. Within 2 hours, half the house was empty. Mark stood in the living room watching his home get dismantled piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do about it. I walked past him toward the front door with the last box of my things. I stopped and looked back at him standing there in the empty room. By the way, I said, that $15,000 you kept from the HELOC is backup? You're going to need it for a lawyer. And even then you're going to lose everything in court. Sleep well, Mark. I walked out and didn't look back. I drove to Dana's house 2 hours away and collapsed on her couch. She made me tea and didn't ask questions and just let me sit there shaking as the adrenaline finally wore off. Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Patricia texted me a photo. Mark being served with divorce papers at our house by a process server. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. I thought it was over. I thought I'd won, and now it was just a matter of letting the legal system grind him into dust. But then Sunday afternoon I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Jessica. And what she told me made me realize this whole situation was about to get much, much worse. Don't hang up, Jessica said immediately. Please. I know you have every reason to hate me, but I need to talk to you, and you're the only person who will understand what I'm about to tell you. I almost hung up anyway. This was the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband for 18 months, who was carrying his baby, who'd believed his lies about me being worthless. Why would I want to hear anything she had to say? But something in her voice stopped me. She sounded scared. Not angry, not defensive, scared. You have 2 minutes, I said. Mark showed up at my apartment last night at 11 p.m. She said. He was drunk and he was furious and he tried to force his way inside. I had to threaten to call the police to get him to leave. But before he left, he said something that made me realize there's more going on here than either of us know about. I sat up straighter on Dana's couch. What did he say? He said you were going to ruin both of us. He said you'd planned this whole thing to destroy his life and I was collateral damage. He said you were crazy and vindictive and I needed to be careful because you'd come after me next. And then he said something that really scared me. He said, she doesn't know everything yet, but when she finds out, she's going to make both our lives hell. My stomach dropped. What does he mean I don't know everything? That's why I'm calling you. Jessica said, because I went through my apartment after he left and I found something hidden in my closet. A shoebox full of documents and USB drives that Mark must have left here at some point. And when I looked through them, I realized Mark's been lying to both of us about way more than just the affair. What kind of documents? Financial records. But not the ones you sent me in that package. Different accounts. Different transactions, companies I've never heard of. And there's emails, hundreds of them, between Mark and people whose names I don't recognize. It looks like he's been involved in something illegal and he's been using both of us as cover. I felt cold. Send me photos of everything. Right now. I will, but I need something from you first. I need to know that whatever Mark's involved in, you're not going to assume I was part of it. I know I slept with your husband and I know that makes me a terrible person, but I swear I had no idea about any of this other stuff. He told me you were basically unemployed and he was supporting you, and I believed him because I'm an idiot. But I'm not a criminal and I don't want to go down for whatever he's done. Just send me the photos, I said. We'll figure out the rest later. She hung up and 30 seconds later my phone started buzzing with incoming messages. Photo after photo of documents, bank statements, emails, contracts. I zoomed in on the first few and my hands started shaking again. These weren't my client payments. These were completely different accounts with amounts way bigger than anything I'd been dealing with. There were transfers for $20,000, $30 minus $5,000, $50,000 going to and from accounts and names I didn't recognize. There were emails about consulting fees and referral bonuses and commission splits that made no sense for Mark's sales job. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were emails between Mark and his boss at the tech company he'd just quit, dated over the past 2 years, discussing payments from clients that were being routed through Mark's personal accounts before being reported to the company. Mark had been skimming money from his employer's sales commissions. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was stealing from his company too. I called Patricia immediately, even though it was Sunday evening. She answered sounding annoyed. But when I explained what Jessica had sent, her tone changed completely. Forward everything to me right now, she said. If Mark's been committing fraud against his employer, this is bigger than a divorce case. This could be criminal charges at the corporate level. How much bigger are we talking? Sarah, if what you're describing is accurate, Mark could be looking at federal charges. Wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. We're not talking about a messy divorce anymore. We're talking about prison time. I forwarded her all the photos Jessica had sent. Another call came through. Unknown number again. I let it go to voicemail but immediately got a text. This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you regarding Mark Sullivan. Please call me back at this number. My heart stopped. The police were already involved. How? I called the number back with shaking hands. A woman answered on the first ring. Mrs. Sullivan, thank you for calling back. I know this is sudden, but we've been investigating your husband for approximately 6 months as part of a larger fraud case involving his former employer. We'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning if possible. 6 months? You've been investigating him for 6 months and nobody told me? We couldn't inform you because we weren't certain of your involvement. But based on recent developments and information we've received from your attorney Patricia Chen, we believe you're a victim in this case rather than a participant. We'd like to get your statement and any evidence you may have. I told her I'd meet her tomorrow at 10. At the police station. She gave me the address and hung up. I sat there trying to process what was happening. My plan had been to divorce Mark, sue him for the money he'd stolen from me, and watch him lose everything. But now there were federal investigators involved and Mark was potentially looking at serious prison time for crimes I hadn't even known about. Patricia called me back 20 minutes later. I've been going through the documents Jessica sent. Sarah, this is massive. Mark's been running a scheme where he manipulates sales contracts to skim percentages off the top before his company sees the revenue. He's been doing this for at least 3 years, possibly longer. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hundreds of thousands, at minimum. And that's just what I can see from these preliminary documents. The actual number could be much higher once forensic accountants dig into his full financial history. So what does this mean for the divorce? It means you're going to get everything and Mark's going to prison. But it also means this case is about to get very complicated very fast. The feds are going to want to seize Mark's assets as proceeds of crime. You'll need to prove which assets are legitimately yours versus which ones came from his illegal activities. I thought about our house, our joint accounts, the furniture I'd just moved out. How much of what I thought was ours was actually bought with stolen money? There's something else, Patricia said. The investigators are going to want to talk to Jessica too. She's been in a relationship with Mark for 18 months. She's pregnant with his child. And he was storing evidence of financial crimes in her apartment. They're going to look very hard at whether she knew anything or benefited from the stolen money. She sounded genuinely shocked when she called me. She probably was. But shocked doesn't mean innocent. If Mark gave her gifts, paid her rent, took her on trips, all of that could be considered proceeds of crime. She could be in serious trouble even if she didn't know where the money came from. After I hung up with Patricia, I just sat there staring at my phone. 20-4 hours ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was getting revenge on my cheating, thieving husband by destroying his fake business and divorcing him. Calculated, satisfying. But now I'd stumbled into something much darker. Mark wasn't just a bad husband. He was an actual criminal who'd been running a sophisticated fraud operation for years. And I'd been sleeping next to him every night completely oblivious. My phone buzzed again. Text from Jessica. The detective just called me. I'm meeting her tomorrow at noon. I'm terrified. Did you know Mark was doing illegal stuff with his company? I texted back no. I thought he was just stealing from me. I had no idea about the rest. What do I do? I'm pregnant with his baby and now I might be going to prison. Tell the truth. That's all you can do. I felt a weird pang of sympathy for Jessica. Yes, she'd slept with my husband. Yes, she'd believed his lies about me. But she was 20-8 years old and pregnant and potentially facing criminal charges because she'd trusted the wrong man. In a twisted way, we were both Mark's victims. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the nights Mark came home from work talking about big sales he'd closed, bonuses he'd earned, deals he'd made, how much of that had been real and how much had been stolen, how much of our life together had been built on lies and crime. Monday morning at 10 I walked into the police station and was taken to an interview room. Detective Chen was there along with an FBI agent named Rodriguez. They had me sit down and they started asking questions. How long had I been married to Mark? Did I have access to his financial accounts? Had I noticed any unusual spending patterns? Did I know about his relationship with Jessica Martinez? Had he ever mentioned having problems at work? I answered everything honestly. I told them about finding the spreadsheet on his laptop, about discovering he'd been stealing my freelance income, about hiring Patricia and David and Marcus to build my divorce case. I showed them all my evidence, everything I collected over the past 2 months. Detective Chen looked impressed. You built a better case against your husband than most trained investigators would have. This documentation is extremely thorough. I'm a designer, I said. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. Mrs. Sullivan, did you have any knowledge of your husband's activities regarding his employer? Any indication he was diverting company funds? None. I thought he was just a sales manager doing normal sales work. I had no idea he was stealing from them too. They asked me dozens more questions. About our house, our cars, our bank accounts. Whether Mark had ever given me expensive gifts or taken me on lavish vacations. I realized they were trying to figure out if I'd benefited from stolen money, if I was complicit in any way. After 2 hours, they seemed satisfied that I was genuinely ignorant of Mark's corporate fraud. Detective Chen said they'd need me to testify when the case went to trial, but for now I was free to go. She also said I should expect Mark to try to contact me, to possibly threaten me or try to manipulate me into helping him. He's going to be desperate, she said. Desperate people do dangerous things. If he contacts you, don't engage. Document everything and call me immediately. I left the police station feeling shaky. This had escalated so far beyond what I'd planned. I'd wanted revenge. I'd wanted Mark to lose his job and his money and his mistress. I hadn't wanted him to go to federal prison. Except maybe I did. Maybe that's exactly what he deserved. I drove back to Dana's house and found her in the kitchen making lunch. She took one look at my face and poured me a glass of wine, even though it was 11:30 in the morning. That bad? She asked. Mark's not just a cheating husband who stole from me. He's an actual criminal who's been defrauding his company for years. The FBI is involved. He's probably going to prison. Dana's eyes went wide, and his pregnant mistress found evidence in her apartment, and now she's terrified she's going to prison too, even though she probably had no idea what he was doing. This is insane. This is like a true crime documentary. I know. And I started it. If I hadn't found that spreadsheet and built my revenge plan, none of this would have come out. Mark would still be stealing from everyone and nobody would know. You can't think of it that way, Dana said. You didn't make him commit crimes. You just exposed them. He did this to himself. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but Dana nodded at me to pick up. Hello? Sarah? It's Mark. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying or screaming or both. We need to talk. Please. I know you hate me, but I need you to listen to me. The police told me not to talk to you. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes and then you never have to hear from me again. I should have hung up. I should have called Detective Chen immediately. But part of me wanted to hear what he had to say. I wanted to know if he'd finally tell me the complete truth. 5 minutes, I said. And what Mark told me in those 5 minutes changed everything I thought I knew about our marriage. I never wanted any of this to happen. You have 4 minutes left, I said coldly. The company thing, the fraud investigation. And then I realized how easy it was and I did it again. And again. And it became this thing I couldn't stop. So you're telling me you're a thief who got addicted to stealing. How does that make this better? I'm not trying to make it better. I'm trying to explain. The company started noticing discrepancies about 8 months ago and they hired an outside firm to audit the sales department. I knew they were going to find what I'd done. I knew I was going to get caught. That's when I started taking your money. I felt like I'd been slapped. What? I needed to build up cash reserves before everything fell apart. I thought if I could hide enough money in offshore accounts before the investigation caught up to me, I could disappear. Start over somewhere else. The Summit Solutions thing, the job opportunity, I actually thought it was real at first. I thought it was my way out. When I realized you'd set it up as a trap, I almost respected how smart you were. You're telling me you stole from me to fund your escape plan from your corporate fraud? Yes. And Jessica, I got involved with her because I needed someone who didn't know anything about my real life. Someone I could run away with if things got too hot. I told her all those lies about you because I needed her to think I was the good guy. The provider, the one worth following to another country. My head was spinning. Another country? I have accounts in the Cayman Islands, Sarah. Almost $300,000. Money I skimmed from the company over 3 years. I was going to take Jessica and disappear. File for divorce from overseas, claim you'd gotten everything in the settlement, and start fresh somewhere with no extradition ready. But I ruined that plan. You destroyed it completely. When Summit Solutions fell apart and I lost that $5,000, I couldn't afford to run anymore. I'm trapped here. And now the FBI knows about the offshore accounts because Jessica found the documents and gave them to you and you gave them to the police. Good, I said. You deserve to be trapped. You deserve all of this. I know, Mark said quietly. I know I do. But here's the thing you need to understand. If I go down, other people are going down with me. People at the company who helped me, who took cuts of what I was stealing. People who are way more powerful than me and way more dangerous. Is that a threat? It's a warning. There's a senior VP at my company named Gerald Hutchins who was getting 30% of everything I skimmed. He's the one who showed me how to do it in the first place. He's been running this scheme for over a decade with multiple sales managers. When the investigation started focusing on me, he cut me loose and made sure all the evidence pointed my direction. I'm the fall guy, Sarah. And Gerald knows you have documents that could expose him too. I felt cold. How would he know what I have? Because I told him. When you served me with divorce papers and I realized you'd been planning this whole thing, I called Gerald in a panic. I told him you had evidence of financial fraud and you'd given it to the police. He asked what kind of evidence. I told him about the spreadsheets, the emails, everything Jessica found in her apartment. And he got very quiet and then he said, "You need to make that evidence disappear. And how exactly am I supposed to do that? I already gave copies to the FBI. I don't know," Mark said, and now he sounded genuinely terrified. "But Gerald is not someone you want as an enemy. He's connected, Sarah. Like really connected. To people who make problems disappear. Are you seriously telling me that some corporate executive is going to come after me because I exposed your fraud? I'm telling you to be careful. I'm telling you that this is bigger than you thought it was and you need to watch your back. Gerald called me this morning and told me that if I cooperate with the FBI investigation, if I give them names evidence against him, my family will suffer. And you're still technically my family. I'm divorcing you. I'm not your family. Gerald doesn't care about legal technicalities. He cares about protecting himself. And if he thinks you're a threat, he'll eliminate that threat. I wanted to believe Mark was just trying to manipulate me, trying to scare me into somehow helping him. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because despite everything I've done, despite all the ways I've hurt you, I don't want you to get hurt because of me. You should move somewhere safe. Stay with friends. Don't go back to our house. And don't trust anyone from my company who tries to contact you. 3 minutes are up, I said. I hung up and immediately called Detective Chen. I told her everything Mark had just said about Gerald Hutchins, the offshore accounts, the threats. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "We know about Hutchins. He's actually the primary target of our investigation. Mark's just a small fish. But if Hutchins knows you have evidence and he's making threats, we need to take that seriously. I'm sending a patrol car to your location right now. You think he'd actually try something?" Gerald Hutchins has been under investigation for financial crimes for 18 months. We haven't been able to build a solid case against him because he's very good at covering his tracks and intimidating witnesses. If he thinks you're a threat to his freedom, yes, I think he'd try something. 20 minutes later, there was a police car parked outside Dana's house. The officer told me I should consider staying somewhere else, somewhere nobody would think to look for me. He said the investigation into Hutchins was entering a critical phase and I was a key witness whether I wanted to be or not. I called Patricia and explained the situation. She said she'd arrange for me to stay at a secure location, a short term rental paid for with cash under a fake name. She said I should pack a bag and be ready to move within the hour. Donna looked terrified. "Sarah, what have you gotten yourself into?" I was trying to get revenge on my cheating husband and accidentally uncovered a massive corporate fraud ring. That's what I've gotten myself into. I packed quickly and left Dana's house with a police escort. They drove me to a small apartment building on the other side of the city and got me set up in a furnished unit on the 3rd floor. The officer gave me a number to call if anything suspicious happened and told me to keep my phone charged at all times. I spent that night alone in a strange apartment, jumping at every sound, wondering how my carefully planned revenge had turned into witness protection. The next morning, Detective Chen called. "We arrested Gerald Hutchins an hour ago. We also arrested 2 other executives and for sales managers who were part of the fraud scheme. Your husband is cooperating with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence." "How reduced?" "He's looking at 5 to 7 years instead of 15 to 20. He'll have to pay full restitution, forfeit all assets including the offshore accounts, and testify against Hutchins." "And Jessica?" She's been cleared of any involvement. We believe she genuinely had no knowledge of Mark's criminal activities. She's free to go. I felt relief for her even though part of me still resented her for sleeping with my husband. But she was just a kid who'd trusted the wrong guy. She didn't deserve to go to prison for that. What about me? I asked. With Hutchins in custody, yes, you're safe. You can go back to your normal life. Except I didn't have a normal life to go back to. My husband was going to prison. My house was half empty and soaked in memories of betrayal. My marriage was over. My trust in people was shattered. But I also had something I didn't have 2 months ago. I had my money back, all $70 minus $3,000 plus interest that Mark would be forced to pay in restitution. I had the satisfaction of knowing that my careful planning had not only destroyed the man who'd betrayed me but had also taken down an entire criminal organization. Over the next 3 months, everything got finalized. Mark pleaded guilty to fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The divorce was finalized and I got the house, the cars, everything. Mark's offshore accounts were seized and the money was used to pay restitution to his victims, including me. Jessica had her baby, a little girl. She sent me a message through Patricia saying she was sorry for everything and she hoped I could find peace. I never responded, but I didn't wish her any harm. She was raising her daughter alone and that was punishment enough. I sold the house because I couldn't stand to live there anymore. Too many ghosts. I moved to a different city and started over. New apartment, new clients, new life. My freelance business actually grew after everything happened because word got around about what I'd done. People respected the fact that I'd systematically destroyed someone who wronged me while staying completely within legal boundaries. I got inquiries from clients who specifically said they wanted to work with someone that's strategic and detail-oriented. About 6 months after everything settled, I got a letter from Mark. It was sent from the federal prison where he was serving his sentence. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter said he was sorry, that he knew sorry wasn't enough, but it was all he had. He said prison had given him time to think about what he'd become and how he destroyed the one person who'd actually cared about him. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, but he wanted me to know that watching me take him apart piece by piece was the most humbling experience of his life. He said I was the smartest person he'd ever met and he'd been an idiot to underestimate me. The letter ended with a single line: "You won. Completely. I hope that brings you peace." I read it once and then I burned it in my kitchen sink. I didn't need his apology or his acknowledgement. I already knew I'd won. A year after everything started, I was working on a design project when I got an email from a potential client. She said she'd heard about my work and wanted to hire me for a major website redesign. We set up a call to discuss the project. During the call, she mentioned that she was going through a difficult divorce and her husband had been hiding assets. She asked if I had any advice on how to find hidden money. I smiled, and I told her exactly what to do. Because here's what I learned from all of this. Revenge isn't about screaming and throwing things and making dramatic scenes. Revenge is about patience. It's about gathering evidence, building a case, and executing a plan so perfectly that your target doesn't see it coming until it's too late to stop it. Revenge is about making someone face the consequences of their actions in a way they can't escape or manipulate or lie their way out of. And revenge, when done correctly, doesn't just destroy one person. It exposes an entire system of lies and brings down everyone who participated. Mark thought he was smart. He thought he was getting away with everything. He thought I was too naive into trusting to ever figure out what he was doing. But he made one critical mistake. He left his laptop open. And that one moment of carelessness gave me everything I needed to dismantle his entire life. So if you're watching this and you're going through something similar, if someone's cheating on you or stealing from you or gaslighting you into thinking you're the problem, here's my advice. Document everything. Build your case in silence. Get professional help from lawyers and investigators and accountants. Don't confront until you have all the evidence you need. And when you finally strike, make sure it's devastating enough that they can never recover. Mark is going to be in prison for 6 years. When he gets out, he'll have a felony record. No money, no assets, and no prospects. He'll be 40-5 years old starting from nothing. I'm 30-6, debt-free, professionally successful, and finally at peace. Some people might think what I did was cruel. Some people might say I went too far. But those people didn't have their spouse steal from them for 3 years while having an affair and calling them worthless. I regret nothing. And if Mark is somehow watching this from prison, I want him to know one final thing. That spreadsheet you left open on your laptop, I've kept a copy of it. Not for legal reasons, those are all handled. I keep it as a reminder that one moment of arrogance, one moment of thinking you're untouchable, can cost you everything. You underestimated me, Mark. And that was the biggest mistake of your life. To everyone watching, thank you for following this story. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Was I justified? Did I go too far? What would you have done in my situation? And remember, subscribe for more stories like this. Because trust me, there are a lot more where this came from. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and absolutely devastating. And that's the best kind.